Humans always seem to think that the galaxy is a quiet, empty place. In reality, they're just looking in the wrong direction, fixated on radio waves and digital bleeps, endlessly waiting for the cosmic equivalent of a polite email. Meanwhile, the true language of the universe is being broadcast right over their heads, written in starlight and delivered at the speed of existential dread. If they only looked up long enough, really looked, they might begin to notice that the universe isn't so much silent as it is a bustling interstellar cocktail party. Every star is whispering secrets to its neighbors. Every black hole is rumored to have a scandal. Galaxies flirt. Nebulae sulk. And quasars, well, quasars don't shut up. Long ago, reading the stars was a respected and occasionally dangerous art, practiced by gifted individuals such as the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazrad, the reclusive Ivan of Hyperborea, and, believe it or not, even Giorgio Tsoukalos, who has, with unnerving enthusiasm, claimed that practically every dot in the night sky is evidence of an alien conspiracy. And while he may not be entirely correct, he's not entirely wrong either, which is arguably worse. But not the man in the battered pickup truck. He stepped out into the storm. He wore a waterproof coat that did a magnificent job of being soaked through. He carried an old telescope in one hand and a folding chair in the other. He looked like a slightly eccentric amateur astronomer, which was, of course, entirely the point. But why would someone visit this high cliff every night, come rain, shine, or minor apocalypse? Only a madman would do that, but he wasn't a madman, not exactly. He looked like a man, talked like a man, had a driver's license, paid taxes, and once awkwardly attended a barbecue. But he wasn't a man. He was a stranded Yithian, currently occupying the body of Loki McGill, a history teacher, amateur stargazer, and very occasional chess club champion. McGill had been quite agreeable about the arrangement. Or at least, he hadn't been given time to disagree. For 10 long Earth years, the Yithian had lived among humans. He had learned their weather, their languages, their taste in sandwiches. But most of all, he had studied their skies. It hadn't been easy. Earth's constellations were, by galactic standards, a mess. Like someone had spilled a bag of stars and tried to connect the dots using mythology and wishful thinking. But with patience and an absurd amount of tea, he had made sense of it. Now, he knelt by the telescope, adjusting the lenses with fingers that still felt awkward and too short. He pointed the device toward a patch of sky he'd checked 1,000 times before. The wind howled louder. Lightning flashed in the distance, and then he saw it. Not a star exactly, not a comet or flare or trick of the atmosphere. This was a pattern, a pulse, something threaded through the constellations like a signature. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you knew what to look for, and if your mind was shaped like a 17-dimensional polyhedron with a fondness for mathematics. The message was clear. It spelled out his earthly name. It gave a time, a place, a destination. Something was coming. But that was the unsettling part. Who knew his earthly name? As far as the Yithians were concerned, he was either dead, lost in space, or neatly filed away in some forgotten corner of the collective memory under lost on retrieval. He certainly hadn't received a Christmas card in years. And yet, here it was, a message broadcast in the oldest medium there is, written across the stars like graffiti in divine handwriting. In a universe where stars don't just shine but speak, missing a message like that would be like ignoring someone hurling a flaming typewriter through your front window with a sticky note that says urgent. He folded his chair. He packed the telescope, and he drove down the cliff, windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically, toward a meeting 10 years, and several million light years in the making. The drive back was uneventful, barring the thunderstorm, the potholes that seemed to align in unnatural patterns, and the fleeting glimpse of luminous eyes in the forest, eyes that evoked memories of the malformed dark young of Shub-Niggurath, creatures that plague many unfortunate corners of the galaxy. Loki McGill, if one insisted on calling him that, steered his battered pickup truck into the narrow alley and eased it into its usual spot between 2 local oddities, a long-defunct laundromat, and an open but regretful fortune-teller's shop. Run by a delightfully cryptic old woman, whom he strongly suspected was a terrestrial manifestation of the dream witch. Wedged between them like a secret trying not to be noticed was his own domain. A lopsided little shop with peeling paint, leaning windows, and a sign that proudly, if unconvincingly, declared, "The Yithian Archive." Fine occult texts, questionable artifacts, used paperbacks. Loki had made no particular effort to conceal what the place was. The name was right there, after all. He had told people, on more than one occasion, and usually after 2 cups of tea too many, that he was a stranded alien mind from a race of time-hopping psychic librarians. Most customers assumed it was branding. A few thought it was performance art. One man asked if it was a band. None of them believed him, which, frankly, made things far more convenient. He unlocked the back door, which responded with a creaking groan. Inside, the shop was dim and musty. The shelves were uneven, warped with age and overloaded with books. Tomes of uncertain origin sat beside used paperbacks and dusty boxes of incense. Near the counter, an empty brain cylinder rested on a piece of velvet, its surface dulled from long neglect. A cracked and partially shattered trapezohedron sat on a nearby shelf, humming faintly and leaking a thin, unpleasant light that he really ought to do something about eventually. But in the back, past the beaded curtain, under the flickering green lamp, beyond the rack labeled "Possibly Dangerous," read twice, was a staircase that spiraled down. This was not on the blueprints. The cellar had started life as a basement, but over the past 10 years had evolved into something closer to a personal sanctum/diplomatic outpost. Dimly lit and circular, it bore a suspicious resemblance to a reading chamber from ancient Yith, a design he recreated from memory, clay, and a surprisingly useful IKEA clearance sale. Pinned to the stone walls were star charts, some recent, some from centuries he preferred not to date. Instruments of unknown purpose ticked quietly, and perched imperiously on a cushion atop a stack of eldritch etiquette reprints was Lord Pinakada's humbug, a portly Egyptian cat with 1 eye, 3 fangs, and the soul of a librarian. "Good evening, Your Reverence," Loki said, shrugging off his drenched coat. "I've seen the stars. They called my name. There's going to be a thing." Naki blinked. "I know." Loki sighed, drying his hair with a towel. "I wasn't expecting it either." He packed with precision. A bag of dried seaweed crackers. He'd developed a fondness. His star charts. Some empty scrolls. A feather. Vial of powder of Ibn Ghazi, and his personal spell book. For the cat, he prepared a generous bowl of smoked tuna, a backup bowl of dry food. At the front of the store, he flipped the sign to closed and scribbled a note beneath it. "Back soon. Hopefully never." He gave the shop one last glance and stepped outside. Rain still fell, though more politely now. He got into the truck, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb with a sigh of anticipation. Something was coming, and he intended to meet it first. At midnight, Loki sat in his truck, parked in a dimly lit parking lot on the outskirts of Lower Manhattan. The rain poured down in sheets, heavy and relentless, driven by a wind that seemed to tear at the city's very bones. Loki had been waiting here for what felt like hours, as the storm raged around him, but his purpose was clear. He had been instructed to be here at this exact time and place. No hesitation, no questions. The message had been simple, cryptic even: be here. At this time, wait. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. The hum of the truck's engine was the only sound within the confines of his vehicle, aside from the rhythmic tapping of rain against the roof. Loki didn't mind the waiting. It had been a long time since he'd felt the thrill of anticipation, and this, whatever was about to unfold, was worth it. Then, through the downpour, he saw the figure. A man, drenched, with his coat pulled tight against the storm, was walking toward him with purpose. His face was obscured by the hood, and the rain made him appear almost spectral. He moved with certainty, though, as if he knew exactly where he was going, what he was doing. Loki didn't need to think twice. This was it. The man reached the side of the truck and knocked sharply on the window. Loki rolled it down just enough to hear the voice over the storm. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice urgent but calm. "You wouldn't happen to be heading towards Tudor Street, would you? I need a ride. I'm stranded here and—" Loki cut him off. "Tudor Street's on my way," he said coolly. "Get in." The man hesitated for only a moment before opening the passenger door, stepping into the truck with a damp shuffle. As he settled in, Loki glanced at him. The man was in his late 30s, with dark, tired eyes and an air of someone who had seen too much. He was familiar in a strange way, but Loki couldn't place him. "Thanks," the man said quietly, brushing rainwater off his jacket as he closed the door behind him. "I didn't know how I'd get home tonight. The storm's making everything impossible." Loki nodded. "It's been a night of waiting." Glancing around the truck, seemingly unsettled by the heavy silence. "It's rare, these sorts of encounters. Sometimes the universe tells you when and where you need to be." Once inside the truck, Loki set the wheel into motion and drove through the rain-slicked streets of Lower Manhattan. The storm was relentless, the downpour hammering against the windshield while neon lights blurred in the watery haze. A copy of Witchcraft Today lay open on the dashboard, a silent nod to the morning he'd picked it up from a street vendor, though tonight Loki wasn't merely focused on the road. He was in the mood for conversation. The hum of the truck's engine mingled with the rhythmic tapping of rain on the roof, but the quiet was soon broken by a clear, questioning voice. "Do you believe in all this stuff?" Loki glanced over at his passenger with genuine interest. "This," he said, nodding toward the book on the dashboard with a wry smile. "In a way, yes. I suppose these people really believed that dancing around naked and cursing on crucifixes would change something. But really, it all sounds rather childish, don't you think?" They were clearly deluded. "Yeah, fit for a book like that," the man replied with dry humor, his tone inviting further discussion. Loki leaned into the conversation, his eyes never leaving the rain-streaked windshield. "But do you know what was really behind these witch cults?" The man pressed, his tone shifting to one of earnest curiosity. "How do you mean?" Loki asked, clearly intrigued now and ready to delve deeper. "The real cults, not the medieval devil worshippers, but the ones that truly revere gods that exist," the man explained, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. Loki arched an eyebrow, clearly engaged. "Depends on what you mean by gods that exist," he replied thoughtfully. The man continued, "These cults formed in search of something deeper. Maybe you've read some of their texts. You won't find them on a street stall like the one that sold you that book, but there are a few preserved in museums." Loki recalled a past trip with a nod. "I was at the British Museum once," he remarked. "Took a look at what they had on display." "The Necronomicon, I'm sure," the man said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "And what did you make of it?" "It was unsettling," Loki admitted, his tone conversational and open. "Not as horrifying as I'd been led to believe, but there's a lot about it I just can't piece together." The man's voice softened as he continued. "I thought it was nonsense, too vague, really. But if it had detailed what those pages hinted at, no museum would ever dare to display it. Better that only a few of us know the truth." He paused, then added, "I'm sorry, I tend to get carried away. My name's Ezra Vant. I suppose you could call me an occultist." Loki's smile deepened with interest as he returned his focus to the conversation. "Go on," he said warmly. "I'm all ears. You were saying something interesting." "What about people searching for things? Are you in pursuit of something?" Ezra asked. "Not really," replied Loki, his tone thoughtful. "But I've harbored a persistent conviction since I was young. Nothing monumental, just the idea that nothing is ever quite as we see it. Imagine if there were a way to perceive the world without our eyes. Everything would appear entirely different. Strange, isn't it?" When no further words came, Miguel turned to face his companion. In Ezra's eyes, there flashed a look of surprised triumph before he tempered it with a calm resolve. "It's curious you should mention that," Ezra remarked. "I've felt the same way for ages, often on the verge of proving it. You see, there is a method, one that lets you see as you would without truly using your eyes. But it's not only dangerous, it requires two people. It might be an intriguing experiment for us to try. However, this is where I bow out. The truck rolled to a stop before a block of flats in Brooklyn, where the concrete path, bordered by dripping trees, led to a building with windows painted in yellow and black. "Mine's on the ground floor," Ezra said as he unlatched the door. Loki, still intrigued, parked the truck and got out. He leaned against the side of it, watching Ezra. "Wait a minute. Did you really mean what you said about seeing things as they truly are? Are you interested?" Ezra bent down, peering through the open window. "Remember, I did warn you it might be dangerous." "I don't mind," Loki replied, stopping the engine and getting out of the truck. Although the trees still dripped, the rain had finally ceased. The two men walked up the concrete path, and the wind danced around them as if exhaling from an icy expanse high above. Loki felt a quiet relief when they passed through the glass doors and entered an apartment hall decorated with vibrant, surreal wallpaper. While a staircase led upward to other flats, Ezra turned toward a door to the left framed in sleek glass. Miguel hadn't expected anything in particular, but what he found beyond that glass-paneled door left him in awe. The living room was furnished in a modern style, with contemporary wallpaper and a chic electric fireplace. Yet several items in the space were far from ordinary. Reproductions of works by Bosch, Clark Ashton Smith, and Dolly enhanced an uncanny ambience, further enriched by esoteric tomes displayed in a glass case in one corner. Those, at least, could be found elsewhere, however. Other objects defied explanation. On the table in the center, an egg-shaped object emitted a strange, intermittent whistling, while in a shadowed corner, an unidentifiable form stood on a pedestal, draped in a muted canvas. "Perhaps I should have warned you," Vant interjected. "I imagine it's not exactly what you'd expect from the outside. Anyway, sit down, and I'll fetch some coffee while I explain a bit." Ezra slipped into the compact, modern kitchen, and Loki heard the clatter of pans from behind the closed door. Over the rhythmic clanking, Vant's voice called out, "I was quite a peculiar kid, you know, exquisitely sensitive yet oddly resilient. After I saw a gargoyle in a New York church once, I used to dream it was chasing me. And there was this one time, a dog was hit right outside our apartment, and the neighbors couldn't help but comment on how intently I watched it. My parents even summoned a doctor, who declared me excessively morbid and advised that I be kept far from anything that might unsettle me. As if they really could protect me from that." He chuckled lightly before continuing, "It was back in grammar school, actually during physics class, that I first got this notion. We were studying the structure of the eye, and the more I scrutinized the diagrams of retinas, humors, and lenses, the more convinced I became that our vision is inherently distorted. Sure, it's easy to say that what forms on the retina is just an image, no more warped than what you'd see through a telescope, but that explanation is far too simplistic for me. I nearly stood up and told the teacher my thoughts, though I knew I'd be laughed out of the room." His tone shifted as he recounted further. "I didn't ponder it much more until I reached university. Then, a fellow student named Taylor got me talking, and before I knew it, I found myself drawn into a genuine occult circle. Not a bunch of hedonistic thrill-seekers, mind you, but a group that truly understood how to tap into elemental forces. I could elaborate on our practices, but some of the details would take ages to explain. Tonight, I aim to try our experiment, though perhaps afterwards I'll divulge more about what I've discovered. Things like the untapped capacities of the brain and the secrets buried in a nearby cemetery." He paused, then continued in a quieter tone. "Eventually, after our cult was exposed and everyone was forced out, I managed to remain on the fringes. Even better, some members abandoned sorcery entirely, and I convinced one of them to hand over all his books. Among them were the revelations of Glocki, which is where I first read about the process I plan to invoke tonight. I read of this." At that moment, Vant reappeared in the living room carrying a tray with 2 cups and a pot of coffee. Crossing the room with deliberate calm, he stopped before the pedestal where, concealed under a canvas, the infamous image of Daloth was kept. As Miguel leaned forward in curiosity, Vant pulled the canvas away. Loki could only stare. The object was far from shapeless. Its complexity defied any simple description. Hemispherical forms and gleaming metal were interlinked by long, flat gray plastic rods, merging into a uniform mass from which individual cylinders protruded. As Miguel examined the contraption, he felt as though unseen eyes gleamed from between the rods, yet whenever he tried to focus, he perceived only the voids between them. The most unsettling aspect was his growing sense that this was not merely an object, but a living image, an echo of a creature from a dimension where such impossible geometry could exist. For a fleeting moment, as he turned to question Vant, Miguel noticed that the device had seemingly expanded to occupy nearly the entire wall, but when he looked back, it was unchanged. Or so he thought, for he could not be certain of its original dimensions. So, you're getting illusions of size, Vant noted, clearly aware of Miguel's puzzlement. That's because it's only the three-dimensional projection of the true form, while in its own dimension, it appears entirely different. Vant explained. But what is it? Miguel asked, his tone edged with impatience. That, Vant replied simply, is an image of Daloth, the render of the veils. Vant then moved over to the table where he had set the tray. Pouring coffee into a cup, he handed one to Miguel, who remarked, "You'll have to explain all of that later. But while you were in there, I had a thought. I would have mentioned it earlier, though I wasn't in the mood for an argument between rooms. It's all well to say that what we see is distorted. Consider this table, for instance. It isn't really a flat, rectangular surface, yet when I touch it, it feels perfectly flat and rectangular. How do you explain that? Simple tactile hallucination." Vant answered, "That's precisely why this experiment might be dangerous. You see, you don't actually feel a flat surface. Your mind convinces you that it matches your visual perception. Sometimes I wonder, why would the mind set up such a delusion? Could it be that if we were to see ourselves as we truly are, it might be overwhelming? Look, if you want to see the undistorted reality, then so do I." Miguel interjected. "Just don't force me into it now, especially not when you've got me so intrigued. You mentioned Daloth. What exactly does that mean?" "Well," Vant began, "I'll have to digress a bit. You've been eyeing that yellow, egg-shaped thing ever since you entered. You've read about them in the Necronomicon, haven't you? Remember the references to the crystallizers of dream? That's one of them, a device that projects you into alternate dimensions when you sleep. It takes some getting used to, but for years I've been able to access dimensions up to the 25th. If only I could describe to you the sensations of that final plane, where space itself exists and matter loses all form. And don't ask me where I acquired the crystallizer. Until I'm sure its guardian won't follow, I dare not speak of it. But never mind that. After I read the revelations of Glocki and learned how to test this idea of mine, I resolved to experience it firsthand. It was a process of trial and error, but one night I found myself materializing in a place I'd never seen before. The walls and columns soared so high I couldn't even glimpse their tops, and right in the center of the vast floor was a jagged fissure running from wall to wall, as though torn apart by an earthquake. As I watched, the fissure's edges blurred and dimmed, and something began to rise from it. You know, the image appears entirely different in its own dimension. I actually saw its living counterpart, and you'd scarcely believe it if I tried to describe it. It swayed for a moment, then began to expand. It would have consumed me in minutes, but I barely had time to react. I bolted between the towering columns. I didn't get far before a group of figures emerged, clad in metallic robes and hoods, each carrying a small replica of what I'd witnessed. Their leader asked why I'd intruded into their realm, and I explained my intent to invoke Daloth's aid in piercing the veils of reality. They exchanged glances, and then one of them handed me the image he was carrying. "You'll need this," he said. "It serves as a link, and you won't encounter any like it in your world." Then, as suddenly as it had all begun, The scene vanished, and I found myself in my bed, yet I was still clutching that very image. Miguel interrupted, "But you haven't really told me." "I'm getting to that now," Vance said. "You know where I got that image. You're probably wondering what it has to do with tonight's experiment, and what Daloth is anyway. Daloth is a god, an alien god. He was worshipped in Atlantis, revered by the astrologers. I suspect that's where his earthly worship began. He must remain unseen, for when the eye tries to follow the contortions of his form, it drives one to madness. That's why no light must be present when he's invoked. When we call on him later tonight, we'll have to extinguish all the lights. There must even be a deliberately inaccurate replica of him. It's essential. As for why we're invoking Daloth on Yuggoth and Tond, he's known as the Render of the Veils, a title rich with meaning. In that realm, his priests can see not only the past and future, but also how objects extend into the ultimate dimension. If we invoke him and hold him by the pentacle of planes, we can harness his power to cut through the distortion. And that's about all I can explain for now. It's nearly 2:30 already, and we must be ready by 2:45. That's when the cosmic openings will align. Of course, if you don't wish to proceed, now's the time to say so. I don't want to prepare for nothing. I'll stay," Miguel said, though his eyes lingered on the image of Daloth with a trace of unease. "All right. Now, give me a hand here, will you?" Ezra swung open a cupboard beside the bookcase. Miguel watched as several large crates, neatly arranged and emblazoned with painted symbols, were revealed. Vant lifted one crate while sliding another from beneath it. As the cupboard door closed, Miguel could hear Vant lifting a lid. When he turned, Vant was already laying out its contents on the floor. Before him, an assortment of plastic panels was assembled into a distorted, semi-solid pentagram. Nearby lay 2 black candles molded into vaguely obscene shapes, a metal rod bearing an enigmatic icon, and a skull. The skull unnerved Miguel. Holes had been bored into its cranium to hold the candles, yet its shape and a featureless face made it clear it was not of human origin. Vant began arranging the objects methodically. First, he pushed chairs and tables against the walls, then centered the pentagram on the floor. Carefully, he placed the skull, now holding the candles, inside the pentagram and lit them. As he did, Miguel called out from behind him, "I thought you said we weren't to have any light. What about these?" "Don't worry," Vant explained calmly. "They won't illuminate anything. When Daloth appears, he'll draw the light from them, which helps align the openings." Turning to the light switch, Vant added over his shoulder, "He'll manifest in the pentacle, his solid 3-dimensional form confined there, though he'll extend 2-dimensional projections into the room, and you might even feel them. Don't be alarmed. He will also take a little blood from both of us." His hand moved toward the switch. "What, you never mentioned that," Miguel began. "It's all right," Vant interrupted reassuringly. "He takes blood from anyone who calls on him. It's his way of testing our intent. He'll take more from me, since I'm the priest, and you're merely here for your vitality to open the path for him. It certainly won't hurt." Without waiting for further protest, Vant switched off the lights. A faint glow from a neon sign outside filtered through the curtained window, barely illuminating the room. The black candles burned dimly, and from Miguel's vantage by the bookcase, he could discern nothing beyond the pentagram. Suddenly, his host slammed the metal rod bearing the icon onto the floor and began shouting in a frenzy. "Uthgos Plamph Daloth Asgui, come, O thou who sweepest aside the veils of sight, and revealest the realities beyond." There was more to the incantation, but Miguel scarcely registered it. His attention was riveted by the luminous mist arching from both him and Vant, which swirled and merged into the misshapen cranium of the skull within the pentagram. By the end of the chant, an unmistakable aura encircled the 2 men and the skull. Miguel watched in silent fascination until, at last, Vant fell silent. For a moment, the room was quiet. Then the strange aura of mist that had surrounded them faded, leaving only the faint light from the candles, which seemed to flicker and brighten. As Miguel watched them, their flames began to dim, then suddenly extinguished completely. In their place, something darker, like black flames, flickered for an instant before vanishing. And then, Miguel knew, they were no longer alone. A rustling sound came from the direction of the pentacle, and a shape seemed to stir within it. Immediately, Miguel felt a sensation of movement around him. There were light, dry touches on his skin, brushing his face, gliding over his arms. Something moved between his lips, but before he could react, it was gone, leaving only the memory of its touch. The sensations were too swift to be grasped, each feeler passing before he could even begin to catch it. But when the rustling shifted back toward the center of the room, a salty taste lingered in his mouth. He knew, without question, that one of the feelers had drawn blood. From the center of the room, Vance's voice broke the tension. "Now that thou hast tasted our blood, thou knowest our intent. The pentacle of plains shall bind thee until thou dost fulfill our desire, to tear aside the veil of perception and reveal the truth beyond. Wilt thou show it, and in doing so, free thyself?" The rustling grew louder, more frantic. Miguel wished desperately for the ritual to end. His eyes were adjusting to the faint glow from the garage's neon sign, but the dark was too oppressive, almost tangible. Somewhere within it, he could feel a shifting presence, like a thing writhing in the shadows. Then, with a suddenness that rattled the walls, there came a discordant sound, a hideous screech of metal scraping against metal. The whole building trembled. The noise built to a deafening crescendo, then abruptly fell silent. Miguel, breathless, knew that whatever had been in the pentacle was gone. The room was still dark, the candle's light not even a faint memory. Miguel's eyes could find nothing but the consuming blackness that pressed in from all sides. From his position near the door, Vance spoke quietly. "Well, he's gone, and the way that figure's been set up, it can't return without completing what I asked. When I turn the light on, you'll see everything as it truly is. But if you'd rather not face it, there are eye patches on top of the bookcase. Put them on, and you won't see anything at all. I can then switch the light back on, and I'll be able to see everything I need to. Afterward, I'll use the icon to nullify the effect. Would you rather do that?" Miguel didn't hesitate. "I've come this far," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not backing out now." Vance looked at him for a moment before asking, "Do you really want to see? Once you do, the tactile delusions will never affect you again. Are you sure you can live with that?" Miguel's voice was barely a whisper, but it was resolute. "For God's sake, yes." Vance nodded, then flicked the switch. "All right. I'm turning the lights on now." Miguel's heart hammered in his chest as he stumbled through the impenetrable darkness. His breath was shallow, each exhale filling the air with more confusion. The world around him was a hollow, suffocating void. There was no direction, no anchor. "My God, where am I?" he whispered, his voice breaking with panic. He felt his way forward, hands outstretched, but there was nothing to grasp, nothing solid to hold on to. "Ezra, where are you?" The name felt foreign on his tongue, a broken thread in the endless blackness. "Where are you? Ezra?" He called again, his voice growing more desperate. The silence that answered was deafening, thick, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Miguel, for Christ's sake, where are you?" The words came in a frantic hiss. His mind was racing, struggling to keep up with the terror that clawed at his insides. His hand brushed something, wet, cold, a slick sensation that sent a shock through his spine. His fingers recoiled, but it wasn't enough to stop the surge of dread that followed. "No, keep away." Miguel stammered, eyes wide, but he could no longer see. There was nothing. Just an empty, oppressive blackness that seemed to close in around him. And then something moved. His pulse spiked as a shuddering, unnatural form shifted before him. "No, that can't be you," he muttered, his throat dry, cracking. It was wrong, all wrong. The air felt thick with something ancient, alive, that had no business being here. "Why can't I hear you? This can't be real. This isn't real." His hands trembled as he fumbled for something to steady himself, but the darkness seemed to grow heavier, like a living entity wrapping itself around him. Suddenly, the shape before him expanded, undulated in the air, rippling and changing, contracting, swelling like some primal, unnameable thing. The color, no, the absence of color, was overwhelming. It twisted in on itself, glowing faintly, an alien presence that made his stomach churn. My God, that thing is you, expanding, contracting, like jelly. No, no, not you. Get away. Miguel's voice shook with horror as he stumbled back, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. Don't come any closer. He gasped, eyes darting through the nothingness. He could feel it closing in on him, suffocating him with its presence. Are you mad? He could hear nothing but the thudding of his own heartbeat in his ears, drowning out the silence. If you dare to touch me, I'll... He fumbled for something, anything, but his hands grasped only air. I'll use the point of the icon. It might feel wet and spongy and look horrible, but I'll use it. His voice cracked, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. A flicker of movement, too fast to track, and the horrible thing was upon him. Miguel's skin crawled as its form pressed against him, a chilling, slick sensation that left him paralyzed with fear. No, don't touch me. He whimpered, pulling back, but there was nowhere to go, no escape from the oppressive presence. I can't bear to feel that. A deep voice, cold and resonant, rumbled from the shadowy figure.
Yithian.
The word echoed in Miguel's mind, sending a surge of panic through him. Heart pounding, he fumbled for something, anything to defend himself. His fingers found the small vial in his pocket, the powder of Ibn Ghazi. Without thinking, he tore off the cork and hurled the powder into the air. The effect was immediate. The figure recoiled, a sound like a guttural screech rising from it. The particles of the powder seemed to burn its form, causing it to writhe and distort. Miguel's breath caught in his throat as the creature's shape began to unravel, revealing something far worse. The air thickened, and in the space where the figure had stood, a new presence took form. An enormous, formless mass, constantly shifting. An impossible presence that defied understanding. Miguel couldn't tear his eyes from it, the name slipping from his lips before he could stop himself. Daloth, he breathed, the true Old One now standing before him in its unfathomable shape. He didn't have time to process the horror. Turning on his heel, Miguel rushed toward the shattered window. His pulse pounded in his ears, his body moving on sheer instinct. As he bolted toward the shattered window, his eyes caught something unexpected, something small, gleaming in the dim light. A box, its surface marked with a Yithian sigil, sat conveniently by the window, as if placed there just for him. Without thinking, Miguel grabbed it mid-jump, clutching it to his chest as he threw himself through the broken glass and into the unknown. The figure moved behind him, but Miguel was faster, his heart racing. He didn't dare look back.